Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on Lifecycle Underwriting, a new approach to long-term rental affordability. My name is Maya Brennan, and I am a Senior Research Associate at the Center for Housing Policy. Joining me on this webinar are Charlie Wilkins of the Compass Group and Ethan Handelman of the National Housing Conference. Charlie and I, as well as numerous other colleagues at the Center for Housing Policy, Compass Group, and Summit Consulting, were part of a multi-year research effort that led to the lifecycle underwriting content that we'll be sharing today. Ethan, NHC's VP of Policy and Advocacy, has partnered with us to think through the policy and practical implications of this new approach to rental affordability. In case any of you are not familiar with NHC and the Center for Housing Policy, we work together and in concert with NHC's members to ensure safe, decent, and affordable housing for all Americans. NHC engages in evidence-based advocacy, provides tools for effective communication, and deepens our understanding of housing issues through the research of the Center for Housing Policy. This webinar's topic is a prime example of the importance of having a combined team of research and policy minds at NHC, and of our commitment to partnering with others to add specialized knowledge wherever needed. Before we begin with the heart of the webinar, I have a few more introductory notes. First, let's address technical difficulties. While we hope the webinar runs smoothly for everyone, we all know that this doesn't always happen. If you run into any technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box in the GoToWebinar control panel to send a message to the staff so that we can help resolve the issue. If that does not work, please email us at chp-feedback@nhc.org. Next, let's cover another frequent question. Is this being recorded? Yes. An archived copy of this webinar will be available at www.nhc.org/lcycle. We will send a link out to everyone who registered once the recording is online. Finally, I'd like to make a quick plug for NHC's upcoming Solutions Conference focused on state and local housing policy. The conference from September 16 to 18 in Atlanta will offer practical housing solutions and guidance across 4 conference tracks: restoring neighborhoods, inclusive communities, how housing matters, and housing communications. At the conference, you can also get interactive demonstrations of L-Cycle, one of the topics of this webinar, as well as learn more about serving the housing needs of veterans and older adults. The conference agenda and registration information can be found at www.nhc.org. So the slide that you should start to see now is an overview of the webinar structure. We've divided the discussion of lifecycle underwriting into 4 main sections. First, the basic concept. What is lifecycle underwriting? Second, we're going to have a software demonstration to give you a taste of the online Lifecycle software. Third, we'll talk about our research findings in brief. And fourth, discussion of the policy and practical implications of lifecycle underwriting. After that, we'll open it up for questions. You can submit questions throughout the webinar using the GoToWebinar control panel on the right. We plan to address all questions at the end of the webinar to the extent that time allows. And before we get any further, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the generous support of the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, who made this entire project possible. Any opinions and errors, however, are ours alone. Now I will turn it over to Charlie to explain the lifecycle underwriting concepts and give you a taste of L-Cycle. Charlie?
Thanks, Maya. Lifecycle underwriting is basically to create affordable rental housing properties so that they will last a long time without having to be recapitalized, resubsidized, worked out, or otherwise fixed. On the slide, you'll see one way of defining that objective. It's important that the property survive financially. It's important that it maintain itself in good physical condition. It's important that when the roof wears out, that there's money inside the property to be able to pay for the roof replacement. The funding for the roof replacement and air conditioner replacement and repaving the parking lot could come from a variety of sources. Usually you start with the replacement reserve but in many properties that will need to be supplemented either with cash flow or from refinancing proceeds. By life cycle, we mean a long period, longer than a minimum 15-year tax credit compliance period, and more towards a definition such as how long would you expect a property to last until it needs to be comprehensively redeveloped. Different people have different opinions about how long that is. We arrived at 50 years basically by reflecting on the fact that properties we knew that were 60 years old or older generally needed to be comprehensively redone, and properties that we knew that were 40 years old or younger generally were okay as long as expiring systems were replaced when needed. So we came to 50 years as our definition. Other people could have different definitions. And it's important in affordable rental housing that affordability is maintained as well. It wouldn't, in other words, it wouldn't be a good outcome to sacrifice affordability in order to be able to replace the roof. So that's what we mean by life cycle underwriting. It's building the property not only physically but financially so that it will be sustainable over the long term. So one way to think about this is how would that be different from what usually happens? The big difference is that we wouldn't expect to have to go back to public funders every 15 or 20 years for more money. We'd expect that when the roof wears out, there would be money inside the property or money that the property could obtain with its own resources by refinancing, for example. And so that we wouldn't need home funds or another round of tax credits or a foundation grant in order to keep the property affordable. A second key difference is that we would do more thinking about the long term when we're developing the property initially. And this would involve some sort of analysis of long-term capital needs, the roof replacements and parking lot resurfacing and window replacements and such. Our research indicates that a small increase in initial public investment is probably needed in order to make this happen. It's a smaller increase than we thought we might find, which was encouraging. Another difference is that the long-term capital needs would become something that would be routinely analyzed as part of initial underwriting. We always analyze the adequacy of sources and uses, and we always analyze the construction budget, and we always look at the soft costs. But in a life cycle underwriting, we would take a formal look at 40 or 50 years of likely roof replacements and air conditioner replacements and such. This wouldn't necessarily require a capital needs assessment, although that might be one good way to go about it. Could also use software such as Lifecycle, which we'll discuss in a moment. We've used the term life cycle cost adjustment to refer to the additional upfront funding that might be needed in order to convert a property from being not life cycle sustainable to being life cycle sustainable. One way of doing that would be to put more money in the replacement reserve at the beginning. Another way might be to have larger annual deposits to the replacement reserve. And in order to do that, it might be necessary to have less hard debt, so there's a lower mortgage payment, so there's more cash flow that could be used to fund a replacement reserve deposit. Another strategy might be to use a shorter amortization period on the hard debt so that at the time many major systems start to be replaced in between years 25 and 30, the property's original first mortgage loan would be paid off, and any cash flow that was being used for mortgage payments could be redeployed into helping with capital needs. Those are a variety of strategies through which a life cycle cost adjustment could be implemented. When we studied this during the research, we noticed that in different properties, the most efficient adjustment would vary, so that you shouldn't assume that we're always talking about putting more money in the replacement reserve at the beginning. Developers and their financing partners would figure out what's the best way to make a particular property sustainable over the long pull. That could mean a larger initial reserve deposit, but it's likely to be one of the other strategies or perhaps a combination of strategies. We're now going to take a look at some screenshots from the Lifecycle software. This is software that we developed as part of the research in order to help us determine what a life cycle cost adjustment might be for each of our sample properties that we studied. And during the course of the research, we concluded that the software might have broader usefulness to other people in the industry. And the MacArthur Foundation encouraged us to convert it to web platformed software that would be accessible broadly. I should mention that the software is free. All you have to do is provide your email address and a password. There's no charge for using the software. We don't collect any data from you. Any information you input about a particular property isn't shared with anybody. So in other words, we think there are no downsides to using the software. The link that we normally use to get to the software is from the Center for Housing Policy website. You can also get there directly at lifecycle.org. The key inputs are things like the unit mix of the property, what the rents are expected to be, the allowance for vacancy loss and bad debt loss, operating expenses, hard debt. For acquisition rehab properties, how much rehab you're going to be doing, and then finally what your plans are for the replacement reserve. Based on that, the software can then tell you the rate at which your long-term capital needs will accrue. It will tell you the funds that are available to meet those capital needs and whether there is a problem. And what you're seeing on the screen right now is the output screen from the Lifecycle software. There are 3 lines on the graph. By the way, the horizontal axis is time. You see a vertical bar at year 15, another vertical bar at year 30. The green line is the funding available in the replacement reserve. So there's an initial replacement reserve deposit of, in this case, about $100,000. And then there's a modest annual deposit to the reserve. The deposit to the reserve increases with inflation. All of these factors are under the user's control, including the inflation rates and the interest rate assumptions and so forth. We provide standard sets of assumptions that you can utilize, but you can create your own custom sets of assumptions as well. And you'll see the green line rises gently over time, as you would expect. You keep adding money to the reserve, and the cumulative reserve funding would continue to escalate at roughly the same rate every year. The next interesting line is the blue line. This shows the capital needs. So this is the cost for things like replacing carpet, repainting, replacing windows, excuse me, repaving parking lots, replacing the roof, and so forth. You'll notice that this line stays relatively modest through about 15 years. Then it picks up steam between year 15 and 30, and right at year 30 it takes a big jump. And that's because a couple of things are happening at year 30. One is that the 10-year systems, such as water heaters, are coming in for their third replacement. The 15-year systems, such as refrigerators and air conditioners, are coming in for their second replacement. And the 30-year systems, such as windows and siding, are coming in for first replacement. So generally speaking, whenever you look at a capital needs assessment for a new construction property, you're going to see this sort of a jump at about year 30. So this is the major stress point for life cycle underwriting. How do we get past that big bump in capital needs at year 30? The red line shows the problem. There is no problem through about year 20, then we start to have a little problem, and then about year 30 we have a big problem which only gets larger as the property ages. And this sort of indicates the basic problem with standard affordable housing underwriting. So if you're doing a tax credit deal, normally it's built financially so that it will make it for 15 years, and then it will need something expensive in order to get through the next 15 years. In life cycle underwriting, we're trying to build the property at the beginning so that we don't need something expensive between years 15 and 30. And clearly, this initial set of assumptions doesn't get there. We could use a larger annual deposit to the reserve. That would cause the green line to rise at a faster rate. We could have a bigger initial deposit to the reserve. That would start the green line at a higher place on the vertical axis. We could utilize some of the cash flow, or we could refinance the property, say, at about year 25. So let's take a look at the next slide, which shows what happens when we use the refinancing scenario. So the software is built so that a few years before the first financial problem, we would plan a refinancing of the property. And by the way, how many years is a few is one of the factors that's under the user's control. We provide a standard assumption and the users can override that. Here, we're showing a refinance between years 15 and 20. And you see that in the green line because it takes an upward jump. And what we did was we put the net proceeds of the refinancing into the replacement reserve. And what that did is it caused the problems to disappear until about year 30. The problems are smaller at year 30 than they were in the previous slide, but they continue to escalate between years 30 and 50. So refinancing is a good option, but it's not a sufficient option. The other scenario that the software supports is what we call the cash flow scenario, and in this approach, we apply all of the cash flow of the property to the replacement reserve, or you can think of it a different way. We're using all of the cash flow to meet capital needs. And that's what you see on this slide. The green line now escalates sharply because the cash flow is being deposited to the reserve. The blue line is the same as it was, and the red line stays at 0 and there are no problems. So what that suggests is for this particular property, perhaps a combination of refinancing and using some of the cash flow would work. Certainly, we could use some but not all of the cash flow, and there could be other options that would be good as well. So, for example, a modestly larger annual reserve deposit combined with refinancing might be a sufficient approach. And the software is built in such a way that you can test those sorts of alternatives relatively quickly and see what they do to the graphs. We're not going to spend a lot more time on the software. I did want to show you one more slide so that I can introduce you to some of the navigation features of the software. Let's look at the cash flow slide. Here we go. Up at the top, you will see a series of boxes. If you click on those boxes in the software, it will take you to the corresponding screen. So we're looking at the cash flow screen where the user enters, or where the user can see a summary of revenues and expenses. And if you wanted to go change the replacement reserve deposit, you could click the box that says replacement reserve and it would take you to the corresponding screen. At the top right, there's a little house icon that will take you to the entry screen of the software. There's a logout box which will take you to the end. At the bottom, there are further navigation buttons. The one on the right says, I'm done now, show me the results. So at any point where you've entered enough information for the software to give you results, you will see that entry. You can click it and it'll take you immediately to the graph. So if you are doing what-if analysis and you're going back and changing one thing, you don't have to go back through all of the screens. You can change the one thing you want to change and then say, I'm done now, show me the results. On the bottom left is an arrow which will take you back to the screen previous. So this lets you kind of go backwards and forwards in the software. There is a blue Learn More tab on the right border of the screen. If you clicked there in the software, it would open up a window that would have additional discussion and information that might be useful to you as a user. At the left of the slide, you'll see little bubbles with question marks in them. If you put the mouse over those in the software, it will show you hints and tips and other information that might be useful to you as a user. So in building the software, we did a lot of testing and we invited a lot of different people to use the software, and we basically included guidance inside the software that responded to any questions that our testers had. And I think that will take care of what we wanted to talk about the introduction to the software. And as I mentioned, you can get there two ways, one from the housingpolicy.org website, which is the Center for Housing Policy. You can also get there directly by lifecycle.org.
Thanks, Charlie, for giving us such a great tour of Lifecycle and laying the groundwork about the whole lifecycle underwriting concept.